Single Dad sat alone at the wedding until the bride walked, past her groom to him. They put him in the back corner, near the service door, at a table with no name cards. Connor Whitfield had arranged it personally. His mother, Renata, had confirmed it by phone that morning, loud enough for the florist to hear. The seating is intentional. Some people belong at the edges. St. Michael's Chapel was the kind of venue that made everyone feel the weight of the occasion. White stone arches, afternoon light through tall windows, 400 candles arranged by a coordinator who had charged accordingly. The Whitfield family occupied the front 3 rows on the groom's side. Renata, in dove gray, her sister Patricia beside her. Connor's business partners and their wives, arranged with the comfortable ease of people who knew exactly where they stood in every room they entered. 600 guests. An orchestra. A receiving line that had taken 40 minutes to rehearse. And in the back left corner, near the door that led to the catering hallway, at a round table with a centerpiece slightly smaller than the others, Thomas Callahan, in a suit that had been pressed that morning, alone. His daughter Rosie was supposed to be at the front of that church in a flower girl dress the color of cream. She was 7. She had been fitted for the dress in April. She had practiced walking with a basket of petals in their kitchen for 3 weeks. The invitation to be flower girl had been rescinded 6 days ago. Connor's mother had called it a logistical simplification. Connor had not called it anything. He had not called at all. Thomas had come anyway, because the woman at the front of that church, the bride, in 12 minutes, was his oldest friend. Had been since they were 9 years old, and she'd sat next to him on the first day of 4th grade, and shared her colored pencils without being asked. He had been at every hard moment of her life, and she at every hard of his. He had driven 4 hours to be in that back corner seat near the service door, at the table that said, "You don't belong here," as clearly as if they'd printed it on the name card they hadn't bothered to make. What Renata Whitfield didn't know was that the woman in the bridal suite, her son's bride, in her mother's altered dress with her hair up and her hands steady, had been awake since 4 a.m., making a decision. What none of them knew was that in 11 minutes, when the processional began, she was going to do something that 600 people would describe differently for the rest of their lives, but that every single one of them would remember exactly. What Thomas Callahan didn't know was any of that. He just sat in the back corner, near the service door, and waited for his oldest friend to get married. He hoped she would be happy. He thought, sitting there alone, that happiness for her mattered more than what had been done to him to arrange it. He was wrong about what was going to happen next. He had never been so glad to be wrong about anything. 8 hours earlier, Thomas had woken at 5:30 to the sound of Rosie already dressed. She was in her church clothes, the navy dress, the white tights she usually complained about. Her hair was in 2 careful braids she had done herself, slightly uneven, held with the yellow clips she wore for important things. She was sitting on the edge of his bed when he opened his eyes. "I'm ready," she said. He looked at her, at the braids, at the yellow clips. "Rosie," he sat up. "We talked about this." "I know." Her voice was even, careful in the register she used when she was holding something in. "I just thought, if I was already ready, maybe you'd say yes." He looked at his daughter for a long moment, at the braids she'd done herself at 5:30 in the morning, at the yellow clips, at the 7-year-old logic of showing up already prepared, as if readiness itself was the argument. "We're not going to the wedding," he said. "I'm going. You're staying with Grandma?" But Kate said, "I know what Kate said." He kept his voice gentle. Things changed. Rosie was quiet. The particular quiet of a child processing injustice with more dignity than most adults manage. She looked at her hands, at the yellow clips, which she'd chosen because Kate had told her, when she showed her the flower girl dress in April, that yellow was a sunrise color, and the best weddings started like sunrises. "Will you tell her I came?" Rosie said. "Even though I couldn't come in. Will you tell her I got dressed and everything?" Thomas felt something move through his chest that he didn't have words for. "I'll tell her," he said, "and that I practiced with the pedals. I'll tell her that too." Rosie nodded, stood up. She was working hard at not letting it show, and she was almost succeeding, and the effort of it was the most heartbreaking thing he had seen in a long time. She smoothed her dress once, precisely, and went to the door. "Dad," she said, not turning. "Yeah. Tell her she looks pretty, even if you can't really see from the back." He sat on the edge of his bed after she left and breathed for a moment. Then he got up and pressed his suit and drove 4 hours to sit in a corner near a service door because Catherine Moore had shared her colored pencils with him in 4th grade, and he was not the kind of man who didn't show up. He arrived at the chapel 40 minutes before the ceremony. A coordinator with a clipboard found his name and guided him, with professional pleasantness, to the back left table. She said nothing about the location. He said nothing about it either. He found his seat. He sat down. The couple at the nearest occupied table, a woman named Helen who turned out to be a college friend of Catherine's, and her husband Paul, nodded at him. He nodded back. Helen looked at his table, then at the empty chairs around him, then at his face, and something crossed hers that she controlled quickly and professionally. "Thomas Callahan," she said. "Yes." "Catherine talks about you constantly," she said. The warmth in her voice was real. Then it faltered slightly, controlled again. She looked at the table arrangement. "This is—" She stopped. "It's good that you came." "I wouldn't miss it," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, and then looked toward the front of the chapel where the Whitfield family was settling into their rows, and her expression did something complicated. He had sat at that table for 35 minutes, alone, watching people file in, watching the front pews fill with the organized certainty of a family that knew exactly how this day was supposed to look. He had watched Renata Whitfield survey the chapel twice, with the proprietary satisfaction of someone confirming that every detail was as she'd arranged it. He had watched Connor Whitfield stand at the altar with his groomsmen in their matching gray suits, tall and composed and correct. And he had thought, "She loves him. I hope that's enough." He did not know, sitting there, what Catherine was doing in the bridal suite. Catherine Moore had been awake since 4 a.m. Not from nerves, or not only from nerves. From something more specific that had been growing since the phone call 6 days ago, when Connor had told her, in the measured tone he used when he had already decided something, that Rosie wouldn't be in the wedding party after all. That his mother felt it complicated the aesthetic. That it wasn't personal. It wasn't personal. A 7-year-old who had practiced walking with flower petals in her kitchen for 3 weeks, who had yellow clips because sunrises mattered, who had been told by Catherine herself that the best part of the wedding would be looking up the aisle and seeing her. It wasn't personal. Catherine had said okay. She had said it because Connor was saying it, and she had been saying okay to Connor's corrections for 14 months. The dress was too casual for his mother's taste, okay. The venue she'd wanted was too far from the city, okay. Her work friends at the head table made it unbalanced, okay. They could move. Okay. Each one small, each one reasonable on its own. Until she was standing at a total she hadn't meant to arrive at. She had called Thomas that night to tell him about Rosie. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said simply, "I'll talk to Rosie. You focus on your day." He had driven 4 hours, and sat in the back corner near the service door because that was the kind of man he was. She had known that since she was 9 years old. Her maid of honor, Jess, had been watching her since 6 a.m. She knew Catherine's face better than most people knew their own handwriting, and she had been reading it all morning without saying anything, waiting. At 11:47, with the processional 13 minutes away, Catherine looked at herself in the mirror. At 11:49, she said, out loud to no one in particular, "I know where Thomas is sitting." Jess did not ask how she knew. She said, "Tell me." Catherine told her. Jess was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you want to do?" Catherine looked at herself in the mirror, at her mother's dress, altered at the waist, at her hair, which Jess had done that morning, at her hands, which were steady, steadier than they'd been in months, because she had been making a decision since 4 a.m. and she had finally finished making it. "I want to go get married," she said. Jess looked at her carefully. "To Connor?" A long pause. "I want to go get married," Catherine said again. Different weight on it this time. "I'm going to need you to trust me for about 3 minutes." Jess studied her for 5 seconds. Then she picked up Catherine's bouquet and held it out. "Tell me when," she said. The processional began at noon. The orchestra played. The groomsmen walked. Jess, as maid of honor, walked alone. The bridesmaids had gone first, 2 by 2, and now the chapel held its breath, the way chapels hold it. The accumulated attention of 600 people all turning toward the same door at the same moment. Connor Whitfield stood at the altar with his hands folded, watching the door. Renata Whitfield sat in the front row, serene. Thomas Callahan sat in the back left corner near the service door and watched. The doors opened. Catherine Moore stood in the entrance in her mother's dress, her bouquet held loosely, her chin level. She looked exactly the way Thomas had told Rosie she would. Beautiful in the specific way of people who have just made an irreversible decision and are at peace with it. She walked. She walked down the center aisle the way the rehearsal had choreographed, past the first rows, past the Whitfield family, past the rows of friends and colleagues and distant relatives who had all come to see one thing happen and were about to see something else. She walked past the second row, past the third. Connor's smile at the altar adjusted slightly. She was supposed to be at the bottom of the steps by now. She was still walking, past the fourth row. Someone shifted. Someone else leaned to see. She kept walking, not quickly, not dramatically, with the steady pace of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Renata Whitfield's head turned. Connor's smile dropped. Helen, at the table behind Thomas, made a sound she didn't mean to make. Catherine Moore walked the full length of the chapel, past all 40 rows, past the orchestra, past 600 people who had gone absolutely, completely silent, and stopped at the back left corner table near the service door, in front of Thomas Callahan. He had risen without thinking. He didn't know when. He was just standing. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear. Her hands on the bouquet were steady. "Rosie got dressed," she said. "Didn't she?" He couldn't speak for a moment. "She wore the yellow clips," he managed. Catherine's breath went out of her, slow and complete, like the last note of something long. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it, for letting it get this far." She held his gaze. "I'm not marrying him." The chapel made a sound, not gasps exactly, but the collective inhale of 600 people processing the same information at the same time. It was the loudest silence Thomas had ever heard. At the altar, Connor Whitfield had gone pale. His best man put a hand on his arm. Connor did not move. Renata had risen from her seat, one hand at her throat, her face doing something between outrage and disbelief. Helen, behind Thomas, was not attempting to control her expression anymore. Catherine had not looked away from Thomas. "I should have said something 6 days ago," she said. "When he told me about Rosie, that was when I knew. I should have said it then." She shook her head slightly. "I needed to say it here, in front of everyone, because I've been saying okay in private for 14 months, and I needed to say the true thing in public." Thomas looked at her, at his oldest friend, in her mother's dress, standing in a back corner near a service door with a bouquet in her hands, and 600 witnesses and an altar behind her with the wrong man on it. "Kate," he said, "I know." She exhaled. "I know." From somewhere in the middle rows, someone started crying. Not from sadness. The sound was wrong for sadness. More like the sound of something long held being released. Thomas reached out and took her hand. Just to hold. Nothing more than that. Not romantic, not yet. Not for a long time. Not until they had both figured out what this was and what it wasn't, and what came after the chapel. Just a hand held across a table, the way colored pencils had once been shared across a desk. Because some things between two people are older than every word they have for them. He said the only thing that was true. "I came because I wasn't going to let you be there without someone in your corner." Catherine looked at him. A long look, the kind that covers years. "You've been in my corner since I was 9, she said. Connor Whitfield, at the altar, made a movement toward the aisle. His best man caught his arm again. This time Connor shook him off. He walked toward the back of the chapel with the controlled stride of a man managing his own face in front of witnesses. He stopped 5 feet from their table. "Catherine." His voice was controlled, barely. "Whatever this is, we can talk about this. We don't have to—" "Connor." Her voice was kind, not cruel, not triumphant, just clear. "I need you to not do this here. You just—" His jaw tightened. "You just walked past me in front of 600 people. "I know," she said. "And I'm sorry for the public part, but not for the decision." She met his eyes. "You let your mother put my oldest friend in the back corner near the service door. You let Rosie be uninvited 6 days before the wedding, and you called it a logistical simplification. And when I said, okay, you moved on to the next thing." She kept her voice level. "Those weren't mistakes, Connor. They were choices. And I let you make them because I kept saying okay." She paused. "I'm not saying okay anymore." Connor looked at Thomas, then back at Catherine. "He's just a friend," Connor said. "Yes," Catherine said. "My oldest one. And you made him sit in the corner near the service door." She looked at Connor for a long moment. "That told me everything I needed to know about who we'd become." Connor stood there, his composure held barely, visibly, at significant cost. His mother had risen from her seat and was moving toward them, but Patricia, her sister, had put a hand on her arm. Renata stopped, thought better of whatever she'd been about to do. Stood where she was. The officiant, a measured woman named Reverend Ann Collins, who had seen a great deal in 20 years of weddings, had descended from the altar and was moving quietly through the side aisle. She reached the back of the chapel, positioned herself gently between the altar and the scene, and said, with the calm authority of someone who had taken a pastoral care course that covered this exact category of event, "Perhaps we give everyone a moment." Connor looked at her, at Catherine, at Thomas, at 600 people who were very still. He turned and walked out through the side chapel door. His best man followed. The door closed. The chapel breathed. By the following Monday, Connor Whitfield had formally requested the return of the engagement ring, which Catherine had already messengered back that evening in the box it had come in. Renata Whitfield made 3 calls on Sunday to mutual friends, describing events in terms that placed the blame with considerable specificity on Catherine's instability. By Tuesday, 2 of those 3 friends had called Catherine directly to tell her what Renata had said and to ask if she needed anything. The 3rd hadn't called Renata back. Word moved through the social network the way word always moves, faster than anyone planned, in more directions than anyone intended. A brief item appeared in a wedding industry blog that had been running for 12 years. No names, but specific enough that anyone who'd been there recognized it immediately. The comments ran to 400 before the moderator closed them. They were not sympathetic to the groom. Connor's professional reputation was not damaged. He was talented at his work, and that work was unrelated. But the social dimension was different. And in the particular world of people who attended 600-person weddings in St. Michael's Chapel, the social dimension mattered. Certain invitations did not arrive. Certain tables had different configurations. He would rebuild. He was the kind of man who rebuilt, but not from the same ground. Renata Whitfield was asked, in January, to step back from the board of the charity she had chaired for 6 years. The request was delivered privately, with the careful language of people who understood that public charity boards ran on reputation and relationships. No specific event was named. It wasn't necessary. Catherine heard about it in February from Helen. She felt nothing much, not satisfaction, just the quiet acknowledgement that rooms have long memories, and that the things you arrange to make other people small tend to not stay private. Thomas heard about none of this. He had been in a different city for most of it, because he had driven home that Sunday and sat across from his daughter at the kitchen table and told her everything, in age-appropriate but honest terms, because she deserved to know. Rosie had listened with the focused attention she brought to things that mattered. At the end, she was quiet for a long moment. "Did you tell her I got dressed?" she said. "First thing," he said. "And the yellow clips?" "Yellow clips, the practice pedals, all of it." Rosie sat with this for a moment. Then she looked up. "What happened then?" "She walked down the aisle," Thomas said, "and came and found me." Rosie considered this with the measured assessment of someone evaluating a story for structural integrity. "In front of everyone?" she said. 600 people. She was quiet. Then, slowly, with the gravity of a 7-year-old passing judgment on something significant. "That was the right thing to do." "Yeah," he said. It was. 4 months later, Thomas woke at 6:10. He lay still for a moment, listening. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it was quiet on Saturday mornings. Rosie sleeping in, the city muffled, the day not yet requiring anything. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window. The April morning was pale and clear. On the refrigerator, Rosie's drawings, a school calendar, a photograph, new, taken 3 weeks ago. Thomas and Rosie and Catherine at a table at the diner, 2 blocks from Catherine's apartment, midway through breakfast, all 3 of them laughing at something off camera. Catherine had printed it, mailed it to him without a note. The photo was the note. He had put it on the refrigerator with a blue magnet, between a drawing of a horse Rosie had made in February and a permission slip he hadn't signed yet. It had been there for 3 weeks, and he still found himself looking at it when he made his coffee. He had called Catherine the Monday after the wedding. She had called him first, actually, Sunday night, from her parents' house, where she'd gone directly after the chapel because her mother had known, in the particular way that mothers know, to have the guest room ready and a pot of soup on the stove. They had talked for 90 minutes. Not about Connor, about fourth grade, about the colored pencils, about the time in high school when Thomas had sat outside the hospital for 6 hours because Catherine's father had his heart surgery and she had not asked him to come, and he had come anyway. They had been talking most days since, not always for long. Sometimes just a text, a photograph, a voice message from Rosie, who had decided independently that Catherine needed to be kept informed about developments in her life. Starting with the horse drawing. They were not dating. They had not used that word. They were doing what they had always done, being in each other's lives with the complete attentiveness of two people who had never found another person they trusted as completely. What would come from that was its own thing, arriving at its own speed. And they were not rushing it. Rosie appeared in the kitchen at 6:45. Pajamas, hair loose. The yellow clips were on the counter. She'd taken them out last night and placed them there, which was her habit, ready for the next important occasion. "Is Kate coming today?" she said. "This afternoon," Thomas said. She said 3. Rosie nodded. She climbed onto her chair, accepted orange juice, looked at the photograph on the refrigerator the way she looked at most things, directly, without performance. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. I think you should tell her." He looked at her. "Tell her what?" Rosie gave him the look, the 7-year-old look that contained, somehow, 40 years of patience with him. "You know what?" she said. He drank his coffee, looked at the photograph, at Catherine's face, mid-laugh, easy and unguarded and completely herself. The face of someone who had stopped saying okay and found out what was on the other side of it. "Maybe," he said. "Not maybe," Rosie said. She ate her cereal with the focused efficiency of someone who had made her position clear and was now moving on. "You've been maybing for 4 months. I'm taking it slow. You drove 4 hours and sat in the back corner near the service door," she said, with the exact phrasing of someone who had heard this story twice and filed it precisely. "That's not a slow person." He looked at her. She looked back, unblinking. The yellow clips on the counter caught the morning light. He picked up his phone, opened the thread with Catherine, looked at the last message, hers from last night. "See you at 3. Tell Rosie I'm bringing the good croissants." He typed for a moment, stopped, deleted it. Rosie was watching him with the patience of a person who had learned patience from someone else entirely and improved on it. He typed again. This time, he didn't delete it. "There's something I've been wanting to say. Maybe over the croissants." He sent it. He put the phone on the counter, drank his coffee. Rosie ate her cereal. 40 seconds later, 3 dots. Then, "I know. Me too." He looked at the message, read it twice, set the phone down. "Well," Rosie said. He looked at his daughter, at the yellow clips on the counter, at the photograph on the refrigerator, at the Saturday morning going about its ordinary business around them. "She said me too," he said. Rosie set down her spoon, looked at the ceiling briefly, in the manner of someone offering a silent observation to the universe. Then she looked back at her father. "Obviously," she said. She picked up her spoon and finished her cereal, because some things were confirmed so long ago that the official announcement was really just catching up with what everyone already knew.